Hey guys, and welcome to this fall, or I should say technically very late summer tour of our vegetable garden. So at the time of this recording, we are mid-September, but here in the Pacific Northwest, where I live up in the foothills, we're almost to fall weather. And you're going to see a lot of my plants are already giving up the ghost, and we're just doing the final harvest from them. But I wanted to walk you through. You got to see the garden when it was first planted and everything was put in this spring. If you didn't get to watch that video, I'll make sure and pop a link in below so you can catch that and so you can see the transition and where things went. But being we are in harvest mode, I thought it would be fun, and many of you requested, to take a tour of the garden now that we're kind of at the end of it so you could see the size of the plants and everything that we're bringing in for harvest time. So even by Pacific Northwest standards, we had an unusually cool and wet summer. In fact, we barely had to water the vegetable garden at all, which on one hand is great because I still have green grass and green pasture for all of our animals and our cattle, so they are completely grass-fed. We didn't have to feed hay early. That's a blessing. And we didn't have any forest fires, whereas this time last year we had a lot of smoke and a lot of haze, and we were at really high danger for forest fires. So there's always that silver lining. But on the flip side, a lot of my warm weather crops did suffer from those cooler temperatures and just having a lot of that rain. A lot of our summer, even in August, we were having days where our daily high, you guys, was like 65 degrees Fahrenheit. So I say all of that as a preface, just so you kind of know when you're looking at things, the weather that we experienced this year. And you never know with gardening, every summer is different and you're going to have some different weather. So with that being said, my winter squash is pretty much done, and you're also going to see quite a few signs of downy mildew and powdery mildew that set in. And if you're just doing overhead sprinkling, you can just switch and do hand watering or using soaker hoses or some type of irrigation where the rainfall or the water is not coming down overhead. Unfortunately, because we were so wet and so often, the disease kind of went through my plants. Now, normally it doesn't kill the plants. It can affect how much you get of a harvest, but usually it's not a big deal. So you are going to see signs of that on the plants, but these really have just reached the end of their lifespan and how long they're going to produce. They were put in the very first part of May. Right now we're September, and that's just about the lifespan of these. So just so you know, when you're looking at them, you can see it, whereas a lot of my summer squash and some of my butternut squash and things that I put in later, more towards the end of May, so about a 4-week planting difference there, those are still producing until we get our first killing frost, which typically I could get as early as next week, or it may be a few more weeks out in that first part of October, but I'm really bumping up against the end of the harvest of all of my summer vegetables, those warm weather crops, because the weather is quickly turning. Okay, so here you can see where I have got my butternut squash, and this is, like I said, this is still producing. You see a little bit of downy mildew, not a whole lot, not too much powdery mildew has set in, though there is a little bit. And these are still going to produce right up until we have that first hard frost. So I still got at least a few weeks of harvest and growing time out of these so they can reach a little bit more maturity, which is great. Okay, so here you can see that these vines have pretty much died back, but I've got a lot of spaghetti squash and I'm just keeping these on the vine, and I'll walk through some harvest tips in just a minute. But you can see how much they have spread out from when we first planted them, if you watch that first video, and how much space that those took to grow. And then you can see my pumpkins. And so when the winter squash are planted together, even though I have space between the hills and where I put the plants, they are going to just vine out and intertwine. And so they have just taken this whole area. And you can see where they're beginning to die back, so you can actually see the fruit, or the pumpkin, and in this instance, the spaghetti squash, where we'll be able to harvest. So over here is my snow peas, which, as you can see, these have went through and these have died off, but I still have quite a few of these vines hanging here because the ones that we didn't harvest, I let fully mature and go to seed. So I haven't had a chance to harvest these for seed yet, but as you guys can see, this is one of the pods. So you are going to want to let it get fully mature, shriveled up, totally dried. And then when you pop this open, now I have got my seeds for snow peas to do next year. And I also have at the bottom, I did do a second planting of these which hopefully, as long as we don't get a really hard killing frost coming for at least a few more weeks, I'm not sure yet, but I'm hoping that I will be able to get at least a harvest or two of fresh snow peas. Really is weather dependent. The seeds will germinate when it's cooler, so this is something that you can plant in the early spring, but the actual plant itself, so the peas, if they hit that hard killing frost, which is usually characteristically when you're in the high 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 or below is usually when you start to wipe stuff out. So if I just get about 33 degrees overnight lows, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it shouldn't kill them and they should still continue to grow, but it's definitely not going to be a very long harvest because of the temperatures, but it's still worth doing. So we planted some and hopefully the weather will cooperate and I'll actually get a second harvest of these snow peas, but I've got all of my seed for next year. So in this section of the garden, which you can see I still got some of my zucchini, which is still producing here, I've also got a row of our beets. So these beets were planted about 3 or 4 weeks ago and they will continue to develop, and I'll leave them in even through the first few frosts. We'll start to harvest these probably about mid to end of October. And this is also where this half of the garden, we were using the wood chips. So I've been doing a test. And so far we put them in the spring, and then the other half of the garden is just where you have your regular bare garden soil. And so far what I've noticed is I really like the wood chips because they have definitely helped with the weed suppression, which is kind of the point of them. They also help in years where you don't have a lot of rain. The mulch can also help keep the moisture in the soil and around the plants, which is a plus. So this year that wasn't something that we were really battling with. The one thing that I have found a little bit interesting though is, especially with the straw in the high tunnel that I've had around the tomato plants, and even with having the wood chips is, and it could be because it's an overall wetter year, so it's a little bit hard to determine, but I do feel like I've had a little bit more slug and snail action than I normally do. But the weed suppression has been great. So I'm going to continue, I'm going to go a whole year, see what the soil tests like and how I feel about it next spring before I either decide to not add any more and go back, or do the entire garden with the wood chips and doing that mulching with the sheets, which is what this is. I have a layer of cardboard underneath there and then a layer of the wood chips on top. So we've got our row here of our beets. And then I've got behind me our Brussels sprouts, which are doing fabulous. And the one thing about Brussels sprouts, those are going to last, they'll last us clear till December, and the frosts make the flavor so much better. So I'm really excited about that. And a lot of you guys have been asking me about doing a video specifically on growing Brussels sprouts. So make sure that you're subscribed to the channel if you're not, because I will be having a video coming up about that shortly on how to grow Brussels sprouts. And also, while we're talking about videos and learning more about organic gardening, make sure that you are signed up for the organic gardening workshop that is going to be starting online completely free October 2nd. You can do that at mulching.com/garden workshop, and I'll have links popping up all over the place and in the video description so that you can make sure you have your seat saved. So here is our Brussels sprout patch, and as you can see, these are doing really well. They're tall. We've got small Brussels sprouts that are forming, and actually at the base I could start to harvest these, but as I said, if they go through a frost, the flavor is so much sweeter and so much improved that I really try to hold off harvesting my Brussels sprouts until that happens. And knowing I'm just a week or two out, I'm just going to let them continue to grow, and I'm not going to be harvesting them yet. But I also have put in, we have our fall cabbage has went in, and since you last saw the garden, I tried to pull crops out and do a lot of succession planning and roll that fall gardening in with the summer vegetable garden. So we've already got all of our fall crops in. If you missed that video, it was 14 crops that you can plant now for a fall and winter harvest, depending upon your gardening zone and your frost dates, which I talk about in that video. But we have got our cabbage in here, and so I put that next to the Brussels sprouts because I still have quite a bit of my companion plants to help cut back on the pests, especially the moths that like to come and lay eggs, and those little worms and things that like to eat the Brassica family. So I've got my orange nasturtiums, which are still in bloom, as well as my calendula, and both of those are some great companion plants that can help. And I did have dill in here. This has already died back and went to seed. And dill is another one that can help, so I let that grow throughout the garden, though most of my dill has already died and went through its whole cycle. I don't have a whole lot left that's in blossom or that's still living, but a little bit. So I tried to put my cabbage plants as well as my kale on that with a lot of these different companion plants. So you'll kind of see those sprinkled throughout the different areas of the garden. So here is the kale, which will continue to go right on through into the fall and the winter months. It is growing great. And then this is one of my bean teepees, and the beans for the most part have went through their growth cycle. We've harvested a ton. I think that I've canned, I want to say it was about over 30 pints of the green beans, and every year I go through my existing inventory of what we're preserving and what I need to take us through a year. And I had an excess last year of green beans. So I canned up a ton of green beans. I still had a good amount in the pantry. I want to say I still had like 30 pints left over from last year's canning. So we'll use that up first. So I did a smaller amount than I normally do of green beans just because I had an excess. The same thing happened, which we'll talk about when we get over to the tomatoes so you can see where they're at. But when you have, because like I said, with gardening, weather can be so crazy. If I have a really good bumper crop, there's never any harm in preserving and putting up a little bit more than you think that you will need or use, because the next year might not be such a great growing season for that thing. Like my cool weather crops are doing awesome this year. The kale, the Brussels sprouts, broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower and bok choy, which I'll be showing you in just a minute that we've got going, those are going great. But a lot of my more warmth summer crops haven't done quite so well. My zucchini, believe it or not, I haven't gotten as good a crop as I normally do from zucchini just because it's been those cooler temps. And even my cucumbers has been a little bit less, so I've still been able to put up quite a few quarts and pints and all kinds of really fun pickles and mustard pickles. The recipe for that in video, I'll pop a link in too. But I just say all of that so that you know about approximately what I'm getting harvest-wise from what you see before you, and also some tips that you can take and apply when you are preserving your food and growing as much as possible. So the beans I still have going up here, I am letting these continue to mature. I'm still harvesting quite a bit of shelled beans, so I've let them go beyond the green bean stage. We're popping and shelling those out, and I'm canning those up. So I've gotten one run of shelled canned. I use these as a white bean that I've already canned and put up. And then the rest, I'm pretty much just letting go to seed and to dry, where I won't be canning them shelf, but I'll just be storing them as my dried bean to use, obviously as a dried bean, but also our seed beans. So these are pretty much at the end, and you can tell they've turned yellow. You're not seeing a whole lot of leaves. These are all dying back, but I'm letting these beans continue to mature on the vine for those purposes, our seed bean and our dried shell bean. And you'll also notice earlier when you saw the footage and we were in the winter squash, even though those vines have really died back, I'm still letting those squash sit on the vine so that they can get fully matured, because the more mature they are, now we don't want to go to the point of over maturity, but I really want them to reach full maturity because they store better that way when I'm using root cellar crop type methods. So even if the vine itself and the leaves are starting to die back, if it's not at the point where it really is considered fully mature yet, it's okay to leave them on for a little bit. They'll still continue to mature on. There is still a little bit of life left in that vine. And then I've got another new row of carrots that we've got seeded here. And so those are just starting to pop up, and those will continue to grow. Carrots are something that you can grow almost all winter long. They will reach dormancy when you start to get super cold and you don't have a lot of daylight, but these will hopefully reach harvest size about the end of October. So we've got a new row of those coming up. And then I've got where we put in cauliflower, broccoli, more cabbage, and some bok choy over in this area of the garden. Now here I have my cauliflower, our broccoli, and then behind there I've got a newer crop of beets that'll be ready to harvest actually probably this week and into next week. And then even further behind that I've got some bok choy, some more carrots, and then our Chinese spinach, which is in the amaranth family, has actually started to go to seed, and that's pretty much at the end, and that's that little more bright red that you see back there. You also are going to notice that there is a lot more weeds that we have growing in this section of the garden. So this is obviously the area where we did not mulch. And as the plants reach more maturity and they're getting close to the point of harvest, so they don't need as many nutrients in order to keep growing. And I know that that frost is coming, which is not going to wipe out my broccoli and my cauliflower. They will go through light frost and they will be okay, as well as the beets. But I stopped being so diligent on my weeding as we entered this part of the year, because like I said, I know that the plants, they're already established, they're already growing, and I do still weed around them, but I don't worry about the rest of the weeds so much. I'm much more focused on getting the harvest in and getting things preserved. So in the beginning, because you don't want, especially things like your onions and your garlic and different things like those that are really going to compete for those nutrients, you want to make sure, otherwise you're going to have really small onions. I'm a lot more diligent when the plants are small and getting established so that they can get a good root system and get growing and give me a big harvest. But once we're kind of at this stage, I'm not quite so worried about it, and things get a little bit more wild and crazy looking in the garden. So my cucumbers, I had a lot of you guys ask what some of the different varieties of plants that we put in. And for my cucumbers, I like the Chicago pickling cucumber. So it's an heirloom, of course. And one of the reasons I love it is because it is a pickling cucumber. So that means typically they're going to be smaller, they're firmer, therefore you are naturally going to get a crunchier pickle, which we're all happy about. Nobody likes soggy pickles, right? And they're pretty prolific for me. So meaning I have about 6 to 8 plants, and that provides me with enough cucumbers at once in order to do up a batch of my pickles. So I really like them. They're also great though as just an eating cucumber. So I will slice some of them up, especially the ones that, you know, kind of hide under the leaves and you don't quite catch when they're the ideal size. We want them a little bit smaller when we're doing our pickles, but they're great in salads or just to slice up and eat. So I like them because they're almost a dual purpose, even though they are technically a pickling cucumber. So again, that is the Chicago pickling cucumber. It's an heirloom, and I first got my seed from Baker Creek, which is rareseeds.com. So here behind me, these are our October beans. So this is another bean that my family has been seed saving for generations, over 100 years. These are a shelled bean, meaning we're growing them in order to shell them out and eat the bean inside the pod, not as a green bean. And these, unlike the other beans that you saw earlier that were already dying, these, the reason we call them an October bean is because typically this bean is ready to pick into harvest closer to October, where our Tar Heel green pole bean is more of a end of July and August bean. So these are growing great. We're letting them develop here before we go about shelling them out, so that the bean is obviously inside the pod is large enough to bother with shelling out. So this is my section here of these beans that we've got growing, and it'll be about 2 or 3 weeks before the majority of them are mature enough for me to shell out and then use. We use them like you would a pinto bean, but they're larger than a pinto bean. So I say they're a little bit meatier than a pinto bean, and they're larger, but in cooking and recipes, I use them like in chilies and soups like you would a red bean or a pinto bean. And they also make really, really good soup beans. So throw in some of those ham hocks in there or some bacon. That's some of our favorite ways that we use these shelled beans. And of course, with a good old batch of cornbread, right? So I always look forward to these, and we're excited to be harvesting them. And they're really pretty when they're a little bit closer to being mature enough so that I can actually show you. They're a gorgeous bean inside. I think they must be related to something kind of like the cranberry bean, because they are streaked with the creamy white and then that pink, really almost a dark burgundy color, both as the bean itself develops. I'll see if I can find a few in here and show you up close. Not only on the pod, but then the bean inside has those characteristics as well. And then I also have down here at my feet, which is being shaded by these beans, which we did strategically wise, is my Swiss chard. So one of my Swiss chard is starting to go to seed. So I'll probably be pulling that one up using the last of that because it is going to seed. But the other two are doing really well. And so those will continue to produce through the fall and into the winter months for me. And having them so that the sun is obviously coming from behind me and they're kind of tucked up against this wall of beans has helped keep them from bolting, even though I do have one that's bolting, and growing well during, even though we didn't really have that hot of a summer, we did have some days that were warmer. So that's kind of a great way. It's not technically companion planting, but it's a great way to take use of the different spaces in your garden for some of those crops that like creating a microclimate or a microzone within the garden. So here we are with my pepper plants that I have just out in the regular garden. I do have some in the high tunnel, which we'll go there and venture in and see in just a moment. But these are, so this is a heirloom red lipstick pepper. And then I've also got the rest of my bell peppers, which I did King of the North this year for the bell peppers. And then this is, as I said, an heirloom. It's called a red lipstick pepper, which is another one of my favorites. And these are all more of your sweet bell peppers. None of these are really hot, including this red lipstick one. But a lot of times people think when you're growing a red pepper that it's going to be red from the moment the pepper begins to form, which is not true. They all start out as green, and then as they mature on the vine, that's when they start to develop that red color and they'll actually turn. So these ones, I've got one here that's starting to turn, that's the oldest and the most mature. And then I've got some of these other ones that I'm gonna let. Now, of course, you can pick them and use them in their green state just fine as you would a green pepper. And then you can let some of them mature to be the red pepper. I really like these when they're red because I think the flavor is phenomenal, and I love to do a roasted red pepper soup, or add, even if I'm not doing just a complete roasted red pepper soup, but I do like to even add these to some of my different soups and stews. And one of my favorites is to combine the red bell pepper and roast that with the tomatoes and do a tomato roasted pepper soup. That's some of my favorites. So here is our peppers, and we'll be getting another harvest. I've been harvesting off of these pretty heavy. We've done, I think I'm at 30 or 35 jars of salsa, and all of the peppers have came right here from the garden, as well as the onions that have went into that salsa. So I don't have a whole lot left because I did grow quite a bit of these to use in the salsa. So the rest of these I'm gonna let develop into the red, and then I can preserve those up for use throughout the winter months. And this is the last of the carrots that were planted in early summer, and these are definitely ready to be harvested. So you can see these are one of my favorite carrots. These are an heirloom carrot, and these are the half Danver longs, and they produce a great carrot. What I love about these is, even though you can see this is on the larger side, this guy's pretty straight, but even when they are larger, I probably should have harvested these a few weeks ago, but even if you get busy because life happens and they get larger like this, I have not found them to be woody or bitter in flavor. They still retain that really nice, crisp, sweet flavor that we like from carrots. And even when they're larger, they're not woody. So these are one of my favorite carrots to plant. In fact, they're really the only variety of carrot that I pretty much put in every year now. For about the past 3 years, I've been growing these. So here we are at the apple tree, and I've already harvested some of the apples from here just for us to be able to eat fresh, and then pulling to do apple pie filling and applesauce and all the fun things that you can do with apples. And then I use the scraps to make apple scrap vinegar. So there is a tutorial, a video here on YouTube on how to make apple scrap cider vinegar. So you can see how to turn your apple scraps into homemade vinegar, which is really fun. But this is our largest and most mature and established apple tree. Like I said, I've already been harvesting from it. You can see where the deer have also come in, and they have been they haven't gotten into too many of the apples, but they are stripping my leaves, and they will go after the apples. So my dog is not doing his job. I'm not sure where he is right now at keeping them at bay. And sometimes we will net them, though this one has reached this size. I usually don't have to net it, but we've really found to keep the deer and the pests out that are larger like that, and birds, really the only really good way that we found is to create a barrier. So sometimes we'll net this, or put some fence posts in and just wrap the bottom portion where they can't reach where the fruit is with some type of, usually like plastic fencing, or even chicken wire will work. But here we've got our apples, and the majority of these, this is one of, they call these where they've grafted in different types, but the majority of the ones on this tree are Chehalis. At least according to what I got at the nursery, that's what the majority of these are. And you can see these apples, you guys, are so big. Now this one, we had a big rain and thunderstorm that came through, and I should have come out and picked more of the apples than I did before it hit. But it was kind of a mad rush. We were doing a lot of other harvesting. So this one, unfortunately, has gotten some rain on it, and so it's gotten some spots, which I can just cut out the bad spots and I'll use this for applesauce or for other type of cooking. But you guys, look at the size of that thing. That is just one apple. I mean, it's huge. Like, I feel like it's half the size of my head. But this thing produces, for just being a dwarf, this produces some huge apples. So here we are at my high tunnel or off-grid greenhouse, and we actually planted on the back side of here. We did more Brussels sprouts. If you can't tell, my family loves Brussels sprouts. It's like no joke, probably one of our favorite vegetables. We eat a ton of them. Even my daughter loves them. They're one of her favorite vegetables. So we put them in multiple spots this year, and we put them on this end of the greenhouse. Depending upon what time of day it is, it'll catch a little bit of shade. It's actually outside the greenhouse or the high tunnel, so you definitely don't want to have those inside a greenhouse during midsummer. Way too hot. They like those cooler temps, but it does take advantage of shade at different times of the day. So we put these at the end here just as kind of a test spot to see how it would work. And it's worked really well, actually. You can tell these are pretty large and robust. We've got quite a few sprouts starting to form and to grow on these. So we're pretty excited with trying out a new spot with these, and it works pretty well, just tucked on the back side here. And then of course, inside the greenhouse, which the sun is starting to come out and it's getting pretty hot. So I'm going to stand out here and talk with you before I hop in there, because it can get really hot. Even though we've got it all opened up right now, so that we've got maximum airflow, it can still get, when the sun is out and shining, like at midday, which it is right now, it's about 12:30. It will reach temperatures of like 90, 95, sometimes up to 100 degrees inside the greenhouse on a really clear, hot, sunny day. So I'm standing out here, and that also means, though, even though we had an abnormally wet and cool summer, because my tomatoes were inside here, they were kept nice and dry, and they had the heat, because even if it was on those cloudy days where it was raining, we were like 65 degrees in August, it still was about 70 to 75 degrees inside the greenhouse, which is perfect for your tomatoes. So that was really helpful, and that's one of the reasons I have grown my tomatoes. I think I'm going on 6 or 7 years now inside a high tunnel here. I just never try and chance it and grow the majority of the crop outdoors. And the ones I've got in here, I do have a Cherokee, but the majority of mine are San Marzano Lungo, which is the paste tomato. And I've already done 30 some jars of salsa, and I've harvested, I want to say I've picked 2 or 3 gallons and threw them in the freezer because I didn't have time to deal with them, and I plan on making those into sauce, which there's a tip for you. Take your tomatoes, if you don't have time to deal with them when they're ripe, just give them a quick rinse, just pop them into the freezer. I don't do anything to them. Put them in a gallon bag, put them in the freezer, and let them, then when you're ready to make your sauce, you let them thaw out. And as they thaw, the skins will come right off. So if you don't have to deal with blanching them, if you're making a recipe where you don't want to have the skins on them, and to can them up. So it's just a really easy way to deal with the tomatoes and to avoid having to blanch in order to peel them. So I'm going to head on and show you some of these beauties and get some of these picked inside. So guys, as I said, it was really hot in the high tunnel, so I just picked my basket almost all the way full. And just to give you a reference, I have planted 18 of the San Marzano Lungo No. 2s, which is an heirloom paste Italian tomato, and they're my favorite. I love them for the flavor. They're really meaty, which means less simmering when you are doing sauces and your salsas, so that they're just naturally thicker. You're not having to get so much water off. But I wanted to show you, I just picked off of those plants and did 9 jars of salsa 2 days ago. And this is off of just 3 plants, and I've got 18 of them, and this is 3 days later, and I'm picking these again. And I need to go back in, but I'm gonna wait till this evening when it's cooler, so I'm not dying from being so hot inside the high tunnel, and pick them to do up some sauce tomorrow. So I just wanted to show you, if you've got a good producing plant, especially like this one, and you've got healthy soil and you're not dealing with blossom end rot or blight, you can get really prolific and a large amount of harvest off of just a relatively small amount of plants. So this is why I'm able to grow only 18 plants, and I literally grow enough tomatoes to make all of our tomato products and preserve them for our family of 4 for an entire year. And I'm sharing a lot of our practices, which are all organic and natural and for a backyard home gardener, in the organic gardening workshop, which is coming up October 2nd. So make sure that you have got your seat reserved. Okay. So now, if you watch the video early in spring, we put in new raspberry plants. My patch had gotten some disease. They weren't doing so well. So we actually ordered from a nursery and got some certified diseased raspberry plants. And I got in some autumn bearing, which is what you see now. So I'm actually getting, this is the first time I've grown autumn bearing. We usually do the summertime, the everbearing, that you get a really large harvest in early summer, usually around June, and you get all of that harvest within just usually about 3 weeks time, and then you don't get them again, which with these, with the autumn bearing, you can have a spring harvest, and then you get a second harvest. It produces 2 canes, which is what your raspberry fruit produces on. And so because I planted these in spring, I didn't get a harvest on them in springtime because they were too new, but these ones actually produced fruit for me in the autumn. So I'm really excited. I did half and half. So I've got raspberries that I'm harvesting in September, which feels really weird when I've only grown the kind that you got all of them in June. But it's really actually fun, and it feels like almost like cheating to come out and have raspberries this time of year. So these ones, of course, because they are new and they're not producing a ton yet because they're just a small plant. This is their first year. I don't have a huge harvest. These will continue to grow and give me a lot more as the years come along. But I did want to show you that I've got these awesome raspberries, and they're great flavor, large, firm berry, even with some of the rain and the different weather that we've had. A lot of times when berries get rained on, they become really mushy, but these have held up really well to our autumn weather. So I'm super excited about them. And I wanted to let you see what this row looks like now that they've been in the ground all throughout the summer and for several months. So here we are in the grape arbor, which this is one of my favorite places to be on the homestead during the summer months when it's really hot out. And actually, we've had different like outdoor barbecues and picnics and gatherings, and sometimes you'll get like a sprinkling of rain. And because the canopy overhead, the grape leaves are so thick, it actually works as kind of a protection from the rain, provided it's not too much of a heavy downpour. So it's one of our favorite places. Great use of space out here where we would just have the cement patio and we can grow vertically up and over. So as it comes into fall, we actually have 2 types of grape. I've got my white table eating grape, meaning it's sweet and seedless, and it's called an Interlaken over here. But those they are sweet enough. Some of them are sweet enough that we kind of been snacking on them and harvesting them right now. But again, if you can let them go through that first hard frost, your grapes will become so much sweeter, and they have, the flavor is so much better. So we try to hold off, provided that the birds have an uncanny thing with grapes and blueberries specifically around here. Like as soon as they hit that point where we think they taste really great and sweet, so do the birds. So we kind of have to watch and gauge, and if I start to see the birds really flocking in here and getting them, even if that frost hasn't hit, then I come out and begin to harvest them just so that we get them and the birds don't get all of them. But right now, they haven't been in here too much yet, so I'm hoping we can hold off for that first frost before we begin to harvest all of these. Now, on the other side of the arbor, we have a different type of grape, and it has seeds. It's a white grape. It must be like a wine variety or something though, because even going through a frost, it never really gets sweet enough. And it's a Niagara, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, grape variety. It never really gets sweet enough to just sit and eat as a table grape. So what I do with these is I do wait for that first frost because it does make them a little bit sweeter, even though they're still pretty tart. It's not like you're going to sit and snack on them, but they're great to juice, and then you can obviously can them up as grape juice or do a white grape jelly out of. So I like to do a white grape jelly from the juice because we're adding in sugar, and you need to, just because they're so tart that nobody would really want to eat that jelly if you didn't add some sugar. And then I like to add some vanilla in. So it's a white grape vanilla jelly. It's really good. And that's how I take use of those, so that they're not just growing, we're actually using them in our food and in our pantry. Whereas these ones, the Interlaken, we just like to eat these. And then if I've got any extra beyond what we're just eating and enjoying in season, then I'll dehydrate these ones up. And of course, then we've got golden raisins. So that's kind of a great thing. But the harvest on these will still be a couple weeks out till we hit that first hard frost. And I do have a recipe if you want it. I'll make sure that I link to it. It's also on my website, on the blog, for my white vanilla grape jelly. So if you want to make that, I got the recipe for you and you can go and print that out. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below if you are growing a garden and how your fall garden and harvest is coming on. And if you've got any questions about any of the things that I talked about or showed you, let me know in the comments so that I can make sure and either A, create another video, which is how this video became, because you guys asked for an updated tour of what things look like in the fall. And also make sure that you subscribe, so whenever our new videos come out that you get them notified and sent to you. Hit that little bell. Okay, I can't wait to see your comments, and I will see you in our next video. Bye for now.